It's going to. So. All right, we're going to do this. And then I'll begin it. So it's really, again, because it was more for
Newbies.
new members, just, okay, I got a blank screen. How's that looking for you? Oh, that's weird. That went dark, didn't it? All right. So really what I wanted to cover, you're going to see my panes on the other side. I went to share it and everything went dark. For those who may be unfamiliar, what are some of the, general things that we deal with? Because I think that might help direct questions from finance committee members as to what's going on with ARPA funds or CARES funds, or, just to give a broader, very just bullet point, things that we do. I'm going to cover budgeting at the high level, sources and uses. And for those who have been on the committee know that come January 1, the town manager does a very high level budget of where we are kind of kicking off the year as it relates to overall, really the revenue is the most important part of that. And then the finance team, we will project out what our budgets would be based on current head count and steps and any increases that we have planned. And then usually expenses at a level funded. So we kind of start that off with what does that budget look like? So that's what the sources and uses. And then as we go into the budget process, it gets more exact and it ties into the budget recommendations. So it's really, where are the sources of funds and what are the uses of funds? And then I hope maybe there's some real items that you'd want specific information on, and we can either get it offline and send it to you, or it can be a topic in the next agenda item that you have, and maybe we can just kind of weave in some of the educational pieces or answers to the questions as normal course. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. Next times, as I put there, I'll get into more detail as to how we budget by salary, by expenses, by debt, and the assessments from our regional school district and other school districts. Those are the real drivers to our expense side. There's always something that will be coming up shortly, the setting the tax rate, and what does that mean, and how does the town do that, and how does that flow into our revenue streams. And I just can state for the record that 85% of our revenue comes from property taxes. And then there's a financial reporting piece. You're going to get your financial report for the first quarter. And when you get that, we can go into some detail as to how we're reporting that out, and also entertain questions or thoughts you have about how that information is supporting you and understanding the operation of the town and your decision-making process. The CIP, which is a capital improvement program, that will be submitted prior to the entire budget process. We will be submitting an order based on last year's capital improvement program at the next town council meeting. And then forecasting and trend analysis, that will be coming down the pipe, because that's also a requirement of the finance department to report. And so when we do report that to council as required by the charter, we can certainly go through our assumptions that we make within our forecasting on the revenue and on the expense side. All right. Any questions on that? Make sense? And if there's some nomenclature or terminology I'm using that you're not familiar with, please let me know and I'll clarify. Because for those who are relatively, and those who would be new, some of the terminology that's specific to municipal finance isn't general lexicon in the private sector. Okay.
Hey, Tony,
Yes.
can I ask a quick question?
Please.
The 85% of revenue coming from residential taxes,
Mhm.
definitely not a surprise. Is that pretty average, or are we above average because of a little bit of that imbalance with commercial?
So when I say property tax, that's both commercial and residential and personal property.
Okay,
Okay.
for
We do have,
property tax, not resident. Okay, yeah.
that's right. So we also have a single tax rate, which means businesses or the commercial are not taxed at a higher rate
Yeah.
than a residential. You know that. And 85%, good question. I would say that it is at least a 2/3
That's not safe.
plus for most communities. That's because state revenue is really driven by the governor, and that calculation is pretty consistent, and the growth there is relatively stable. And then on the local receipt side, we really only have 2 or 3 buckets that are driven by economic development, that be licenses and permits relative to development, and also motor vehicle excise because of the purchasing habits of the residents of the town of Bridgewater. So the short answer is, yeah, I think we're all in the ballpark as it relates to that. And that's why it's really not a mystery how our budgets can grow over a period of time, unless there was a Proposition 2.5 override, which is outside the constraints of Proposition 2.5. Hopefully that answers your question, Susie.
Okay, and then within that 85%, what what's just kind of an estimate of the breakdown between residential versus commercial?
I can actually get you that information, so I don't have to estimate it, and I can give you a document. If Joshua would make a notation, we'll make sure that we send out notifications so we can give you a breakdown of those buckets.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. Glad to help there. Any other questions? So
I just had one question, Tony.
Yeah, please.
So just generally for, you mentioned a prop, it's the revenues are generally not a surprise and you can kind of forecast moving forward. I guess what would trigger an override, Prop 2.5 override?
There's like 3 types of overrides, maybe 4, but I'll speak to the most common. One is an operational override, where you say, look, we've done everything that we can do to live within the Proposition 2.5. That's a 2.5% increase over last year's revenue. That doesn't take into consideration new growth, new building, commercial, residential. And we say the demand on our services is such, we want to authorize something above Proposition 2.5. And it's determined as an amount. And once that's voted that way, it becomes a permanent part of your levy. Okay. So for example, if the town voted, and they did back in, maybe Laurie can correct me if you're here, if I'm wrong on the year, I think it was 2011. There was like a $1.8 million operational override. And that $1.8 million got added to whatever was being assessed under Proposition 2.5. But also that $1.8 million increased by 2.5% since that date, because it then becomes part of your tax base. The other way that we authorize overrides and the town has is debt exclusion. So the new school that's being built was approved outside the confines of Proposition 2.5, and all the debt service is an add-on to the tax base when we go to determine what we're going to levy against the taxpayers. Once that debt is paid off, that exclusion goes away. So those are two examples of what a proposition 2.5 override could look like. One for debt exclusion, one for operational.
Operational meaning we need more
Teachers,
firefighters, policemen? or-
firefighters, correct. Mhm. Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Any other questions before I move on?
Did you say there was 3 types of overrides? Operational, debt exclusion? So
And then
what's the third?
there's one-time capital overrides.
Oh, okay.
Let's say we need $500,000 to buy a new fire engine. And it's going to hit our tax rate. We're going to pay cash for it. We're going to hit a tax rate for 1 year for $500,000. And then once that's paid for, it goes away. Okay. So the finance department, you folks deal with most of well, let me take a step back. Fund accounting is simply that we have within our general ledger hundreds of funds. All right. We have the general fund, which is of one, plus a capital general fund, which is a kind of a subset. We have, and that's where we actually make appropriations to particular capital items. We have the enterprise fund, and there's actually 4 enterprise funds: water, sewer, golf, and transfer station. Those are our 4. But on top of that, we have capital funds. We have a capital fund that we oversee for the water treatment plant, for the sewer treatment plant, for Elm Street. So there's a lot of activities that go on under our capital project funds, which may have some state grant money, which may have some bonding money, and or paying for by the user rates for water and sewer. We also get other grants, typically every year for police and for fire. We have revolving funds, which we have a few, not a lot, and there's not a lot of money, so I'll hold off speaking to that. Agency funds, where we are in fact the agent for an entity, so to speak. So for instance, we would be an agency, we would have agency funds for police details. We bring the money in, it's not a payroll of ours, but we in fact administrate it so that officers can be paid for details. So that's an example. And then the trust funds that you are most familiar with are the Capital Stabilization Fund, Trust Fund, the General Fund Stabilization Fund. We have a one-time and unforeseen stable fund, OPEB stabilization fund, and sick leave buyback or other benefit post-employment stabilization fund. So there's a lot that goes on, and we have a lot of information, and there's a lot of accounting that goes on outside of the general fund and the enterprise funds. Make sense?
Yeah, could you just, OPEC, could you just tell for those that might not know what OPEC stands for?
OPEB, other post-employee benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And then really we spend a lot of times on the budget process. So any questions regarding the budget process, how it works, how we meet, how we arrive at decision-making internally, and for the general fund and the 4 enterprise funds, we would be able to be the go-to folks for answers there. Anything to do with setting the tax rate, we would be the function for any sort of go-to questions there. The tax and utility billing aspect of it, the revenue collections, the financial reporting, where we report internally and then where we report to government agencies. We develop the capital improvement program. We coordinate it with all the stakeholders, and we do forecasting and trend analysis. So all those things are going on. So if there's something that pops in your head and go, I wonder what the history of our motor vehicle excise tax revenue has been for the last 5 years, we'd be the people to go to. I wonder what we billed for utility bills for the water department last year or the year before. I wonder what we billed for motor vehicle excise tax bill. We are the department where those questions would be directed, because we oversee, monitor, and make sure the internal controls are in place for those processes. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that you understood kind of like the catch-all, And maybe that would prompt questions, whether here, outside this meeting, or during your budgetary deliberations, or just wanting to improve your general understanding of municipal finance. We would be the catch-all for those types of things. Are there any questions with respect to that? Okay. So I'm going to jump to and go to another document. I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to show you the sources and uses document, and I'm going to walk through that with you as the one part of what I hope to accomplish today. And so I can show you, if you can you see that well enough? Or should I make it bigger?
A little bigger, please.
You got it. Let's try 165. Now let's go a little bit bigger than that. How's that? Any better? Or is it pretty much the same?
No, that's better. Thanks.
It's better.
Okay. So when we talk about property tax, and I have 21 and 22 here, the sources and uses document, because I want to show how 1 year connects to the next, not for comparative purpose, not for analytical purposes, but more on the tax section. So the first section we're going to talk about is our property tax. So in FY21, we had what you call our total levy limit of $46,306,479 prior to any debt exclusions, which is that override piece that I talked about. All right. What it means is that this is what we had for our operating budgets, excluding debt service for those items over and above Prop 2.5. And the way we roll into 2022 is we start with that as our base. Right now, we had no amended new growth when we went to our budget. So this is based on when we went to our budget in April of last year. And then the 2.5% is a calculation of two things: this plus this times 2.5%. So the 2.5% piece, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger because I think I can. So the 2.5% proposition says we can raise $1.1 million or almost $1.2 million in addition. Now, we had a very, very, very good new growth year. That's the highest new growth number. That's the next number that I'm looking at here, the 1,544,000 since I've been here, and I've looked at it. And historically for the town of Bridgewater, that's the highest number. And that has to do with a lot of commercial and residential building. Okay. And so that is, in fact, the work product of our chief assessor, who then takes into account all those items that weren't part of this last year's number. And there are new parcels, there's splits of parcels, there's new buildings, there's subdivisions, all the things that change between January 1 of 2020, I think that would be right, 19 actually, to January of 2020. If I got those years right, but it's really a January cutoff. So if I have the year wrong, forgive me, but it's a January cutoff. All the things that changed between that time frame had a value that equated to an additional tax of $1.5 million. So if you saw 6 new houses go in, or you saw a tract of land get subdivided and a new road went in, or you went to Elm Street and you saw a new building, 300,000 square foot building go up, that's what drives this particular number. Does that make sense? Which then said our total amount from our tax rate to levy was the $49,000,008,148. Then we go and look at, okay, what's excludable? What's the town excludable debt? And the town still has $270,000, 271,000 roughly of excludable debt. Most of that is for the town hall that we are residing in now. When that was redone, I think we moved in 3 years ago, roughly, if I got that right. The bonding of that, a portion of it was excluded from Proposition 2.5. This number here is the districts for the schools that the town of Bridgewater participate in. Some of them are the schools that are in Bridgewater that are for Bridgewater students, and the high school, which is a joint venture, some of that debt is excludable. But the big change between FY21, because I have to point to it, is it was so large, had to do with the Mitchell School. All right, you can see it went from 1,759,007 to 4,000,002. So the total debt, and then there's a small adjustment. I won't get into the details of premium adjustments. The bottom line, the total increase for the debt exclusion piece for FY22 was 4,051,000, roughly 4. Now I'm breaking this all down because this says this is where 85% of the revenue comes from. Okay, and the part that we look at to pay for operating budgets is this, because this is all dedicated, right? It can't be spent for anything else other than debt service. So this is really what we have in comparison to the prior year to spend. All right. And when I give you the breakdown of the exact percentages and then where it's coming from commercial and property tax and all that, I think it will be a little bit clearer for you. And then we do have some adjustments that we make. This is more for accounting reasons. When you go to set your tax rate within the application, the technology of the state, because we're dealing with $1 billion or multiple $1 billion worth of value for the properties, the property tax base in Bridgewater, when you round, you have a rounding error where you can never raise the total of this plus this to the penny. It will never equal to the penny. There will always be some variation, and it's called excess capacity. And it has everything to do with rounding and nothing to do with the fact that we don't want to spend. Because within the budget resolution document, which I think has been referred to you from council, we do levy to the maximum allowable levy. That has been our budgetary practice. All right, so that's just a rounding. Allowances for abatements and exemptions, it's like an offset that we use because individuals can come in and challenge the assessments. There are also legally obligated exemptions that the town. So the first, excuse me, let me clarify. The first part was abatements. Abatements is if I come in, I go, hey, I'm going to challenge the value that you came to on my property. And you have to bring that before the Board of Assessors. Then there needs to be monies put away if you're going to make an adjustment to the assessment for that particular property. Exemptions are typically legally driven. We have veterans exemptions that the town has adopted certain laws to provide veterans with certain exemptions. And I won't go into all the different categories, but there is an amount of money we put aside that we will offset. And what does that mean? Well, if someone gets billed $5,000, they may get an exemption of $1,000 because they qualify for that exemption. And therefore, we don't collect that $1,000. We actually make a charge to the allowances for abatements and exemptions. So it's an offset to this particular revenue here. So that's where we arrive at what our taxes that we think we're going to collect for budgetary purposes. So this 53,288,852 would become our total budget. A portion of it we budget differently for personal property tax, and the difference we budget, which is a large majority of this, I want to say 95% of it, is your residential, commercial, and industrial properties. Any questions on that? I've given you a lot of information, but the bottom line is this is how we calculate what we can raise on our tax rate. This adds those debt exclusions that I mentioned, and that's the total amount. And that's how we get to the biggest chunk of our revenue source. Make sense?
Yes.
Chris, you have a question?
I'm just curious. So you were saying that that new growth that was
Mhm.
projected for FY22,
Mhm.
was that probably pre-pandemic? Because, we saw a lot across the country, building kind of slowed due to supply chain, pandemic, all different things. Has that impacted what potential new growth will look
So-
like?
Yeah, so here's what we have done recently. And it's a good question. It's one of the key drivers for our revenue. So we really like to get that information and or what we anticipate going forward in 23. We want to get that information as soon as possible. So let me answer the first part of your question. And that is the 1,544,000 was pre-pandemic. All right. However, during the pandemic, there was still craziness going on in the marketplace as it related to building, okay? Because the supply and demand was still there. So the way we had estimated this number, and we're really close. Shelley McCauley, our chief assessor, does some yeoman's work, and she took on a task because I challenged her and her staff to get our new growth numbers more accurate and earlier. So last year, when we went into our budgetary process, we came up with an estimate of 1,544,000. In the past, the municipality wouldn't be able to estimate probably to 50% of what the actual new growth was. And therefore, it always left for a very sour taste when we found money late in the year because we had new growth numbers that were more accurate. And I mean, municipalities, a sour taste. And we would be very conservative as a municipality early in the budgetary process, would cause all kinds of upheaval. But it's nice to say that 1,500,000, I think our number exactly will be about 1,560,000. So we're in the 98%, 99% of estimate. And that's a kudos to Shelley McCauley. We will be having, again, a good estimate for the upcoming year. The chief assessor still saw a lot of new building, which would be accounted for. This I can be exact. So all the new building that went on through 12/31 of FY20 is what we're going to pick up for new growth in FY23. You see the 2-year delay? We're in a 2-year delay. Okay, so we're still probably going to see some decent numbers. Where I'm more concerned is what's going to happen in 24. So there's always this delay because of how you pick up your new growth. And that's statutory. That's the statutory requirement for how you pick up new growth. And it's to ensure that we really have real hard data and we're able to analyze it effectively enough. So when we hit the April 1, we hope to have a number that's as tight as our number was last year as compared to what we estimated. Okay. So back to your question, I think the first part is it was a record year. You can see how it goes back a couple of years, that new growth piece, there's a lag. And in fact, going into 23's budget, we're going to be using information that closed out and as of 12/31/21. So we're going to ramp up. We're keeping track of all of our building permits and we're looking at our splits and we're looking at all the things that happen. So once we hit that December 31, we can crunch the numbers and come up with our best estimate for this year's budgetary season. Okay.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. So that, and no other questions on the new growth and or the property tax. Local aid is pretty simple. State receipts, right? The major number that we get is the unrestricted general government. It used to be referred to as the lottery. When the lottery was first established many years ago, the lottery was established in order to help cities and towns fund education. That was one of the big drivers and pushes and political positioning for that particular revenue stream. As you can see, now they just call it unrestricted government aid. There was intentions in how much of that lottery money would go to cities and towns. And whenever you change the name on something, chances are the percent that was promised isn't the percent that's going to cities and towns, and becomes more ambiguous as to how they calculate the unrestricted general government. But that is the biggest number that it implies. It's unrestricted and is a part of our revenue stream that comes from the state. Our Chapter 90 is just to offset students that are outside of the Rainham School District, where we get reimbursed for because we pay the assessment for them. And you can see that's nominal. And then the state-owned land is, hey, this is property, this is land in the town of Bridgewater where we can't tax. So there's a calculation that's done by the state to determine what they feel we should receive and benefit for that land. And you can see it's relatively nominal when you do a comparison to 53 million. And this total bucket includes 4.6 million. Any questions there? It is the state's calculation. We get these numbers right here every January. And when I say by January, let me be clear. The governor's budget will provide these numbers to us in January. Since Governor Baker has been on board, I don't think the number has ever gone down from what he has proposed, which is really good because it helps us plan our budget. Some cases it's gone up, but it's never gone up really materially. It's pretty much been in line with the governor's proposed budget, which we get in January. So you can see this is a small portion. And I will, for calculation benefit, I'll just put that number there. And maybe we can take a look at that as a percent when we're done. Local receipts. The big numbers are motor vehicle excise. Motor vehicle excise is roughly of course, it didn't work for me. Oh, I'll do that in a sec. %60 of our local receipts. So a lot of times you'll hear me talking about motor vehicle excise because it's 60% of our local receipts. And as that goes, so goes our local receipt contribution, which is greater than our state aid contribution. So to us, we don't have any control over this number up here, that the state, but we have some control or analytics in forecasting this, except for historical trends, whereas we have some more analytical information as it relates to particularly motor vehicle excise tax. Okay, so motor vehicle excise tax, do everyone in here probably gets an excise tax bill, right? And you know, if the car is brand new, the bill's higher the first year and goes down the second year, and goes down the third year, and then goes down the fourth year, right? Okay. This is my fear. And It's panning out with anecdotal information, but also with some factual information. The supply chain for automobiles is at a critical point, right? The chips aren't there. The chips aren't there, then they can't put the car on the lot. The car's not in the lot, now they don't have a chance to lease it or sell it. So that means what I am noticing is individuals that typically rotate their leases out every 3 years are buying out their lease vehicle. Number one, it's got a fixed cost because the buyout is already agreed to at time of lease. And number two, they couldn't flip it for a new car because they can't find one. So what does that mean? Just think what you paid in year one for a new car in year 4. If that trend continues, and that's in the context of 50% of all the vehicles that drive our revenue are leased in the town of Bridgewater. If that number was to cut in half, just think what that could do to this motor vehicle excise tax number. And so we're beginning to analyze that now. We really won't know to our February 1 commitment, because that's the time of the year where it's the large commitment. It's typically between 2.8 and 2.9 million dollars, and we will see everything play out that I'm describing there. So a little background again: 50% of all our motor vehicles and commercial vehicles, not trailers, not motorcycles, not all the peripheral items that make up 20% or 15% of our motor vehicle excise tax revenue. Those that make up 85% of our motor vehicle excise, or 80% of our motor vehicle excise tax revenue, 50% of them have historically been leased. So we could see a significant reduction into FY23. We really know the behavior of the consumers in the town of Bridgewater. We analyze the heck out of them. Now you say, why? Well, we control what we can control and understand what we can understand, and that's a big part of it. Sound good? The other categories that we need to look at is really our building and wiring permits. When there's a lot of building permits, new homes being built, new commercial properties being built, those permit numbers can be high. All right. And so you can see that's our second highest revenue category. And that is the $400,000 if I'm looking at it right. Let me get rid of that color. So you can see that's like 3.5 million of the $5 million. So we don't go into a lot of detail on some of these items, but you will notice that we anticipated a bounce back on our meals tax and our room tax in this coming year, because we saw people, all the restrictions from COVID had been listed in FY22. FY21, excuse me, we saw that being moving in the positive direction. And so we bumped it up in FY22. So if you would add the 3.1 and the 2 and the 1.25 and the 4, you're getting upwards to 70-something% of our local receipt revenue. So I want to pause here for a second, because I would like to think that you're seeing what I'm seeing is figuring out our revenue isn't that complex. I mean, there's not large variables in our revenue. You can see how property tax revenue is generated. You can see that the governor drives our local aid. The highest increase we've ever seen on unrestricted was 3.5%. That's the highest we've seen during the good economy. Motor vehicle excise tax, we hit our peak revenue this past year on that, and I'll explain a little bit more why these numbers are a little more conservative than others, right? So then if you see the 4.6 million and then you see the 5.185, even if we were to see a 10% increase, that's $500,000. Not chump change, but certainly not a 10% increase of this, which is $5 million. So it's pretty predictable what our revenue streams would be. My question to the group here is, do you kind of see it the same way, or are you seeing something that I'm not, or I need to explain further? This is pretty predictable stuff.
Yep, I'm good.
Good. Thank you for the feedback. So when we go to the budget resolution, and this is the biggest part of that, the budget resolution has a surplus number built into it, and you'll see it. Last year it was moved down to 1.5. The year before it was 1.75. And you saw what our free cash for allocation was. Now, last year was very abnormal because we had no idea in FY21 what was going to happen to motor vehicle. We didn't know what was going to happen to permits. We didn't know what COVID was going to do. So we really reduced our local receipt estimates. And in FY21, we used $1.6 million worth of free cash to balance our FY21 budget so that no one was laid off. Okay, so the offset to that $1.6 million was pretty much here. We really pushed these numbers down, or at least this is 1.1 million of it. This number here, we actually had been more conservative, but when the final numbers from this, the governor were realized, they went up, which allowed us to push our local receipt numbers down further. That will be more understood better when I show you the recap and how that works. You'll see how these numbers are really driven by how these numbers are finalized and how the state numbers are finalized. These are the numbers that we typically back into. It's just the nature of how what revenues are really driven outside of our control or through a very meticulous calculation. And then these are the ones where we have some room to adjust. And I'm go back to the 1.5 or 1.75 surplus. We plan on a surplus so that when you get the capital order sometime early November, you'll see that we're going to be spending millions of dollars for capital equipment that are cash-based items. And the only way we would have that revenue, if you understand this now, is to have a surplus at the end of the year. We don't have any reserves sitting in a bank account except for our stabilization fund, which is our rainy day fund. And we do not draw on that for capital. So in fact, you can see, I hope when the budget resolution comes, that this is what this bucket here in the local receipts is what drives our surplus. And if we aren't conservative in these, we won't have a surplus. So these are the ones that I can adjust based on the budget resolution and what's going on in the economy. It's really the only area I have to modify, except for on the expense side, and we're just talking about revenue. On the transfer side, you can see that we have really a few major areas. One is there are costs for the enterprise fund, which we incur in the general fund by providing services, legal advice, accounting, bill collecting, all the things that we do in finance, and we get to offset, and they in fact transfer to the general fund and offset revenue to pay for those costs. All right. So that's a benefit to the general fund. And this is a transfer from available funds. And then the other part is our ambulance receipts fund, which is another big number. And as you can see, the 1.9, the 5.8 make up the vast majority of the 2.9 or $3 million transfers or from reserves or other available funds. I won't go into these unless you have specific questions to, how we calculate this or what that really means. But I suffice to say that all these amounts are in the bank in another fund that we're able to transfer into the general fund to offset related costs. Questions?
Hi, this is Kathy. So what is the actual process to transfer? Like,
The vote of the voting of town council. So when town council accepts the budget and they get the order, then in fact, it gives approval that effective in the next fiscal year on July 1, we can move funds from other funds as designated in the order and outlined here into the general fund, and it is in fact revenue to the general fund.
okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Other questions? So as you can see, and maybe I can calculate this, maybe I can't. Let me check. So the 2,965,000 of the total is 4.5%. And the 5,185,000 of the total is 7.8%. The state aid is a percent to the total. It's not showing as a percent is about 7%. This is 7.8, almost 8. That's 7. This is about 4.5. And then here's our tax. And hopefully this answers Susie's question. 81%. So I was a little overstated by saying 85. And yes, I would believe that, and we can get those numbers for some local communities, that their percentages would be in line with that. So there's the revenue portion of this. Now we're going to go down to the expenses. It's going to be more of a general discussion because I think until you start to get into the budgets, that's all it really is. I think at a high level, we can say that $28 million of the $66 million we have to spend goes to general government. Example, town manager's office, town council, administrator, accounting, town clerk. Those are some examples. Public safety, large percentage of this, you're talking police and fire. Our roadways, streets, lights, snow and ice removal, $1.9 million. Health is really Health and Human Services. That's your health department, and that's also your elderly. Well, it used to be called elderly services. Your senior center, and your veteran services. Culture and recreation. That is your library and your park and recreation budgets. And then you can see the remaining buckets, the next 4, 5, I guess it's 4 right now. This is all related to debt. And so that really goes to nothing. It does go to nothing more than debt service. A big number here is our benefits, which is made up of two numbers, our retirement assessment and our health insurance. Now, I think last time when we were talking about OPEB and moving $100,000 into the OPEB trust, and also going with a PCOT as our OPEB investing arm of the town, we talked about the retirement assessment that the town receives and the health insurance assessment. Retirement is fully for retirees and for the unfunded liability, which is 98% of our retirement assessment. And our health insurance, a large portion of that health insurance budget is also for retirees. So you can see that is a large portion of our salaries, wages, and benefits. So there's $28 million. Now we start to look at our school district. So Bridgewater Rainham School District last year was $31 million. The debt service for the items up above, 4.2 million. And then we also have to cover tuition for Bristol Agricultural School and tuition and debt service for Bristol Plymouth. Now we're part of the Bristol Plymouth district. So we have a number of students that go there, and when we go through the budgetary process, you'll know exactly the number of students that go there, and you'll also know what the assessment per pupil is. And that's how this for Bristol and for Bristol Plymouth, that's how they get assessed. Initially, we planned on FY22 having no students because none had enrolled yet, made the commitment. We will be coming back for a budget adjustment because there were two individuals that did end up going there, and we're going to have to make an appropriation sometime right after the first of the year from available funds to take care of that. But you can see 36, almost $37 million is for education related expenses. $28 million is for running the town's public safety, general government, culture, recreation, health and human services portion. And this is a one number that's that is approved. The school and their the school committee have jurisdiction on how that's spent, and we are assessed based on enrollment. Last year we were at 59.17% of the district's population. These here are certain assessments that the state government will charge us. There's an allocation for county. There's an allocation for our benefit of transportation. And there's some miscellaneous state assessments. But as you can see, that's 416,000. We will have the detail on what makes that up. These two items below, I do want to talk a little bit about the DIF, which is a district incentive, district improvement financing is what it stands for, the acronym. So the town embarked with the state to redo a road that was in very close proximity to Route 24. And it's commercially and industrially zoned. But what didn't attract suitors for those properties there was the fact that that road was really in total disrepair. So an initiative with the state and the town went and created this district incentive financing, which said, look at, as of a certain date, any new growth from development due to the investment in the road, that revenue can be used to pay for the debt service for the building of that road. And so part of our new growth number up here included growth from the DIF, that area off of Elm Street. The total of that amount was 431,496. That would include, portion of that is for new growth. portion of that's from prior years. And that will continue to be directed to what's called a sinking fund or a debt service fund until the debt for that road is paid off. The moment that debt for that road is paid off, those monies will then revert to the general fund, and that will allow us to have, if this was the last payment on the debt, 431,000, then the next year we could use that for other purposes. So it's important to know that a portion of this number and a portion of this number, because the DIF's been around for a few years, and a slight portion of this number equates to what we're transferring into that sinking fund. So if you ever wanted to know what we have in the sinking fund and is it enough to meet our debt service, which the answer is yes, we're very pleased with how the revenues have been generated, and we're very pleased that we're going to be able to pay down that debt without a problem. And in fact, we are hopeful that maybe as soon as next year, we can use some of, because we've far exceeded our new growth in that area, we could begin to pull out some revenue to offset our budgets. And that would be based on my recommendation to we have a district incentive improvement financing group that oversees this project and looks at the total cost and looks at the estimated for financing. And we can make a recommendation to begin to reduce what we're moving into the DIF fund. So in a matter of, I've tried to give you a lot of information in a short period of time, but if nothing else, it may spawn a bookmark for you, so that when we're going through the budget process and we're going through this again, you'll be able to answer some questions, be able to ask some questions that you wouldn't otherwise ask without having this general prep prior to the budgetary process. Any questions on the expense side? I covered a lot there. I know there's not a lot of detail, but I think big picture, you can see we have under control of the work that we do. When I say under control, decision-making of only $19 million out of a $66 million budget. The town manager, myself, and the department heads.
This is really helpful.
Is it?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Great, you're welcome. So what I would ask Josh to do, Josh, you should make sure that each one of the members, especially the new members, and imagine that all the members would appreciate getting a copy or being pointed to the budget document from last year.
Yep.
That was sent, because it does have the sources and uses document in it. And it does have the detailed budgets in it. And it has a lot of information that I think if you just go through, again, I'll help you bookmark when you see the documents, and you can be more prepared to maybe delve into questions related to operations and headcounts and the things that I think you would want to understand and learn more about. That's really all I had, except for at the end was, are the things that I didn't cover or things that you hear about municipal finance or how people talk about municipal finance, that there are questions that you think at some time you'd like to have answered or more fully answered, or answered in an email, answered prior to one of your next meetings. So it's really, I really want to make sure that this is a two-way open channel of communication. And if you go through Josh and the chair and just say, hey, let's get some information on A, B, and C, especially as we're going into the budgetary season, it's only going to help the process. So we don't have to do that now, but just if you could keep that request in mind and funnel that information through Nate and Josh, we'll try to funnel it back as soon as we're able to. Anything come to mind, or we're just gonna wait till something comes up. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is say, well, let that question stay there. Anything to add, question, anything that comes to mind to the group?
Not for me. I think I sort of have to digest things and questions might come along, in the future.
Fantastic. So what
I'm
I'd like to
good.
do is, someone else?
No, I said I'm good, It's Julie.
Thank you.
I don't know
Julie.
if you want an answer from everybody.
No, but thank you. So what I plan on doing is every time we introduce a new document, right? So we'll be introducing the order for the capital, for the fall capital order, which is tied to the FY21 capital plan, all right, CIP program. So I would also ask Josh is to make sure that each one of the members has a copy of that document. Because when we go to review that order, you may have some question, might say, oh yeah, that was on the plan, that was on the plan. Oh, Tony, this wasn't on the plan. How come that got moved up onto the plan? Or this was on the plan, how come that moved off the plan? Again, I think it gives you orientation to the discussion process. So if you would do that as well, it'd be greatly appreciated. Because that's the next document that will be coming before you. When you get the budget resolution document, I'd like you to look at it in the context of, I'm planning on making sure we have surplus at the end of the year so that the following year we have money to fund our capital plan. And I'll just give you a quick instance. In the past, the school and the town didn't work as collaboratively as we are today. So for instance, they agreed last year, and this is what's critical for the capital plan, to remove capital items from their operating budget. But in order to do that, they had to be ensured that we would be transferring funds to them for their capital needs. Well, we did that in May to the tune of almost 500,000, and we'll be doing that again in our next order for about 400,000. So what that does is allow us to look at our operating budgets stripped down to people, expenses, and that's really what it takes to operate the day-to-day functions of any municipal service. So that's really critical. So I'd like to have that in your mind's eye because it is intentional. And we've been working on this for over 6 years. It's taken 6 years that I think our cooperation as a school district and a town is the best it's ever been. So we want to continue that. But with that in mind, you can hopefully come from the perspective that I am, is we need funds at the end of each fiscal year in order to pay for the, I call pay-as-you-go cash type capital items. So I thank you for your time tonight. I went a little over, but I appreciate it. I thank you for all being here, taking the time out of your night.
Thank you.
Right back at you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Definitely
Thanks,
appreciate
Tony.
your
Yeah,
time,
thanks so
Tony.
much, Tony.
You
Good
got
to
it.
see
Have a
everybody.
great night.
Thank you,
Thank
Tony.
Bye.
Bye.